So, continuing from my other video, what I wanted to also clarify in it is that I had a graduate student tuition waiver for 2 years when I was doing this PhD master's program PhD program that eventually turned into a master's, and I had also at that time whatever savings I had at that time I wasn't a minimum wage worker, but even though I wasn't a minimum wage worker, I was in the lower pay group of people at that time. Amount which in Indian terms, when you convert it into Indian rupees, seems like a large amount, but they are usually the usual costs you have to have for having setting up a new home in a different country, for living costs in a new country, for traveling when you want to travel back to India to visit your family. So, whatever salary I had before I started my preschool work, most of that salary got used up during that time. And the preschool job salary was indeed a much lower salary. That's why, even though I loved working with kids, even though I enjoyed that job, even though it gave me actually emotionally a lot of joy that I wasn't having in my personal life, because as I told you, I was actually going through multiple failures, multiple levels of grief and life problems, and because of which actually it wasn't simply about the failure in a PhD program. That was only one aspect of what was going on in my life. I had a real crisis, and I was only like 24, 25 years old when this unfolded. And at 25 years of age, I'm like, should I marry? Should I get back to India? Because invariably, if I go back to India, I would have to get married. What do I do about the dating that I was doing with this guy who was not very supportive? Not just that when I had the failure, he wasn't supportive. Before the failure, also, one time I had sprained my ankle. He wasn't really a supportive person, family person at all. He didn't care whether I had sprained ankles. Only when a friend mentioned to him that I have a sprained ankle, he came to help me. But after that, nothing, because we were always in a very on and off relationship. And that happened. So this was the second failure that was going on behind the scenes while I was even doing the prelims. Before the prelims, I dated him for a few weeks, and I could see that while I was dating him and I was really interested in him, he wasn't really interested in me. But because I was interested in him, when he said that he wanted to buy a car, we bought a joint car. Again, that was also a failure like thing, because while I bought the joint car with him using my money, and I paid more for it, because by then I had lived in US for about a year and I had enough savings from that, and he was barely in the US for a few months. I had actually lived in US over a year, 1.5 years and longer, whereas he had only lived for a few months in US at that time, because he was even though in age he was older than me, in ranking of new student, he was in a different graduate program, but junior to me in that aspect. So he didn't have as much savings. So he paid one third and I paid two-thirds the cost of the car. But who was using the car? This guy was using the car. He broke up with me. Even then, he used the car. He broke up with me. He never paid me back the money of the car. All these things were going on, and I'm not a very too much money-minded person. And because I wasn't a too much money-minded person, and I was also a little naive about love and everything, so I allowed him to use the car because I didn't know driving. I didn't know what I would do at that time. I was struggling with the failure of the PhD, because I got the car, we broke off for a few months. He was using the car while I was just busy studying for the PhD qualifiers. All these things were going on at the same time. So are you going to focus on the car and the money you spent on a car, or are you going to focus on your studies? So I was naturally just trying to focus on my studies. But at that time, he had also broken up with me. So I was very emotionally distraught that why did he break up? What is going on? So that was also influencing my studies. The fact that I didn't enjoy doing research work on animals, that also wasn't consciously impacting my studies, but there was a subconscious spiritual reason behind that factor also leading to my failure. which when I failed, I didn't realize that. It took me few months, few years, and when I was working as a pharmacist, almost like 2 years after my failure, I finally realized the importance of why I had failed my PhD program. So this is how life works. When you have a failure, you don't see the silver lining behind the failure, but later on, couple of years down the line, couple of months down the line, you will slowly start seeing the silver lining. So the first silver lining I saw, and the more you see the silver lining, it attracts gratitude in your life, it attracts alignment with your core soul nature, the more you understand the silver linings from any kind of failure. Like, what was one of the silver linings I found when my mother died? Of course, I was grief stricken about it. Of course, I was grief stricken that my mother couldn't see that I went abroad for a PhD program. I was grief stricken that she was never going to be in my personal physical life with me for any of my life milestones. She didn't even see me graduate my final year. She didn't even see my brother graduate his final year. So all of these griefs were always at that time. For 2-3 years I cried and cried that my mother will never see any of my achievements, right? But she also didn't get to see my failure. So that's another silver lining that again didn't come to me when I failed the PhD program, but came to me many years later. Again, when she wasn't there, the universe was compensating with providing me with nutritional guidance, which, even though this job was minimal pay, I at least got food from that job. And again, if I had instead of doing this minimal pay in a preschool, if that lab work that I had applied for, I had got that job there, I might have got only $50 extra as a salary pay in that job. But even then, with that $50 extra, I wouldn't have got this good quality food that I got while working in the preschool. So see, sometimes even getting a lower paying job may be a silver lining that you don't understand if you have good perks with the lower paying job. And for me, the best perk with working with small kids were, I love toddler age kids. The baby talk that I can do with them. Sometimes some of these kids, one time one of these kids wanted me to tell them stories. I had to make up literary stories because I had forgotten all the fairy tales and stories I had read as a kid by then. So as a 25-year-old, I had to like rack my brains to remember the 5-year-old books that I used to read as a 5-year-old, 10-year-old kid. Then I also used to read many children's stories from India, which I didn't know whether an American student will enjoy reading that Indian context stories. So even though I remembered some Indian stories, I had to still rack my brains to come up with some of the foreign stories I had read, or I wouldn't remember all the stories. I would remember part of the stories. Whatever I was doing, it was just enjoyable for me. The few hours I used to, and it was like a part-time job. I didn't even have a full-time 40 hours job. So it was not just the minimum pay, but I was not working full-time. So I didn't have enough salary only to cover many of my costs, which led me to do what next. That led me to, again, now I was living by myself in a university housing where each of the rooms, I did have roommates, but each of the rooms had a separate pay, and that pay wasn't actually that expensive as a grad student if I had tuition from the grad student scholarship. And I had tuition waiver from the scholarship, as well as some pay that I was getting for doing research work as a grad student. So that pay that I was getting for doing the research work as a grad student, that tuition payment, that scholarship payment that they were giving me, it was enough to live in that kind of a housing. But when I was in a minimal wage stage, my expenses were not getting covered completely. That's why I eventually ended up moving in a housing where 4 girls would share 2 bedrooms with each other. So I didn't have my own individual room anymore, but that halved my rental costs, which was a great save for me. That half rental cost then helped me buy other things, invest in other things, think of whatever application fees I had to pay for the next exams. All those things, all those costs were getting covered. And at that time, even though I had this on and off boyfriend, he never asked me what I needed. He never asked me emotionally what I needed, physically what I needed. Many things were going on. So I knew that he was just not in love with me. That's why he was obviously not that interested in what was going on with me. He had his own things going on, but even then, the quality of a boyfriend is when they are interested in boyfriend or a life partner, is when they are interested in helping you in your troubles. And none of the troubles that I was going through, from getting a sprained ankle, to having financial issues, to having failed an exam, nothing in none of these levels was he a really supportive boyfriend. The only good, I have actually spoken about him in other videos, and in possibly my other channel also that I have. But I have two different channels, one about personal life, and this is overlapping a little bit of personal and professional life, because personal and professional lives always will overlap for all of us. That's why it is very important that when you fail, you have to understand when you're failing or even when you're succeeding. Some people don't realize this about their life, and this is not simply a video about failures, but it is also a video about success. The people don't realize that when you are successful, there are many people involved in your success, and when you're failing, there are also similarly many people who are involved in aiding your failure as well. Like, I wouldn't, if this boyfriend wasn't this bad, or if I hadn't even started dating him, I might not have failed as badly in that exam. I would have maybe got a second chance to do the prelims also. But because I was distraught, because other things were going on, this happened. But on the other hand, when everything bad also is happening at the same time, so I had 3-4 different bad things happening to me before I was failing. My mother had died for 2 years. I was grieving her, which is very natural. You will continue to grieve your parent for a while. So nearly 2 years had only passed after her death. So I was grieving her for 2 years, not 2, by then 3 years had passed. So for 3 years, whereas all my friends had parents where they're calling there, whose moms call them, my dad never ever has had any emotional or any other investment in his kids. So he pretends to have an emotional investment, but in reality, that is just a pretense. It is not a real care, because I lived in US ultimately for 13 years, by the way. So I'm going to talk about my 13 years of journey in US, and then a few years of journey in India in all these series of videos. And in these 13 years, I didn't even get 13 phone calls from my dad. This is the kind of family life I had. I had some cousin who would occasionally call me, but again, she was a very immature and clueless person. So even though I would talk about some of my problems, first of all, I'm not the kind to talk about, at that age, I was not the kind to talk about my problems that easily with people. I would talk about my problems very rarely. Secondly, even if I did mention to her any of my problems, most of the boyfriend related problems, they mentioned like 2-3 years down the line. And even after explaining all those problems, if you have a clueless family, immature person, someone who is narcissistic, all these kind of people, if you have in your life, they will not really actually care what you're sharing with them. There are many people who have these kind of families. So my family at a deeper level never really cared what kind of trouble I was going through. Even if I would speak about some trouble, for them it either was out of context, because they had no context of living in a foreign country, or even after some of them had lived in a foreign country and they had gained some context, again their life circumstances, my life circumstances were entirely divergent. So because of that, they wouldn't understand the financial struggles I was going through. They don't understand. They had parents who would pay for anything that they need. If they needed someday some financial help, they could easily go to their parent and ask them for money. But my dad is such a good dad, he would never ask you for money, or if you ask him for money, he will be very reluctant to give you the money that you ask him. So because of this reason, I knew I couldn't trust or have any faith in my dad to financially support me when I was going through this challenging phase in being a minimal wage worker. Then that's why, only because I knew that I had to support myself, and I tried to support myself the ways in which I could do it. When I did eventually get a higher paid pharmacist job, I got that because of that reason, because the universe knows I do not have anyone else who is going to finance anything for me. The boyfriend is not going to do it, the husband, the father is not going to do it. I don't have any other family who would care if I am really in financial distress at that time. Or even if I had some family living, I did have some, a cousin sister and a cousin brother who also lived in US at that time, but I was not close enough to them. So how can I ask them for any money when I'm not close enough to them? And they still helped me. It's not that they didn't help me. One of my cousin's husbands had thought about something that I might need, and thinking of that, my cousin and her husband gave me a laptop too in my first year of US life, when I didn't have a laptop. And when in the middle of the night at 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the night, sometimes I would go and use the computer labs in our university, which was again a silver lining in US life. That even if I hadn't had a laptop, I did have access to library, I did have access to a computer lab, where our university provided this computer lab for students to work there. The only thing was, while I was doing my PhD, and while I was working in such a lab at middle of the night, sometimes I would go there at like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the night. And while I'm researching papers and printing papers, because they had a printing facility too, while I was doing that kind of research work, sitting in the lab only for 2-3 hours, sometimes it was very creepy at 12 o'clock or later in the night. So that was one thing I couldn't do there. I'm a very nightlife kind of a person, meaning I'm not a party going animal, but I am a nocturnal bird. So for me, studying usually used to happen in the middle of the night, when it's there's a peace and quiet in the world. I like that quietness time in the night to study. Many of my exam studies used to be like, I would study till 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the night. I used to love reading storybooks, so I would read storybooks till 12 o'clock or later in the night. So that is my habit. I like staying up late in the night to enjoy a book or actually do some studying or things like that. So that was a problem, staying in the lab at 10 o'clock, after 10 o'clock in the night. Otherwise, like, it's not that I actually lived in one of the safer cities of US, but despite that, it was still a little bit of a eerie experience. So I was really glad when my cousin gave me a laptop. But what happened with that laptop? Universe also didn't want to possibly, I messed up that laptop with an error, and I didn't have a laptop for a while. Then I had to scrunch some money to get a laptop before my prelims, another new laptop I had to buy before my prelims, and that is the laptop I ended up using during my prelims time. But in all this, while all these challenges I'm struggling with, financial challenges, having a boyfriend who is not sharing what I paid for, not that I complained to him about it, because I'm not the complaining kind about things. When I'm busy with something, I will not complain about it. I'll complain when the right time approaches. And I didn't complain. I just told him that this unfairness was going on, and he was a good boyfriend that way. That if you had a really bad boyfriend who's bad with you financially, they would have taken away the car maybe and not given me the car at all, or whatever messy thing he wanted to do, he could have done. But that way he was a good guy, so he did eventually. When I needed the car while going to the preschool, he gave me the car. And then eventually, when I was working as a pharmacy intern, at the time we flipped the sharing of the car, where I was using the car more and he was using the car less, and things like that happened for a while. And he eventually bought a new car and things like that. So ultimately, what I wanted to say about the failure leading to something successful, I got the pharmacy job later on in life, and in that job I stayed as a pharmacist in that company, and I worked with that company for over 7 years. And in those 7 years, then I learned so many other things, that if I had gone on a research trajectory, these other things related to US healthcare I wouldn't have learned. And when I did learn these other things in US healthcare, at that time I had asked the US, the company I was working for, to sponsor my visa for green card, so that I could continue living in US. because my personal life in the by then around 10 years had passed in US, and in those 8-10 years that had passed in US, after 8 years of living in US, 3 years of working with this company, I asked 8 7 8 years of living in US, I had asked this company one time for a green card sponsorship. Then again, another few years later, I had asked again. So within this 7-10 years of living in US, when I was asking them to sponsor my green card, which they didn't do, now I had to think again, what do I do next? Because as I said, I'm not a planner. I go more with the aligned way of life. I was satisfied with my job and work and everything, but at that time the pharmacist shortages had gone away in our state. So if I had asked them for the sponsorship immediately after becoming a pharmacist, I might have got a sponsorship. But because I took time to ask them for a sponsorship, I didn't get it. And that then led me to doing 2 other research, 3-4 other simultaneous things, which kept me busy in life, really really busy. And but they were all necessary for the next step and next step and next step of my life. And in one of these things, I did a PharmD program. I started a PharmD program, but because my visa was going to end, work visa was going to end, and I wouldn't have any other visa, and it was an online PharmD program, they didn't have any rules for sponsoring a foreign pharmacist or a foreign non-US student. So because they didn't have any way to sponsor a non-US student, even though that program was a 2-year program, I had to halt my program for 1 year. And I only completed 1 year of that program. So I didn't get that Doctor of Pharmacy degree also. So now in a gap of 10 years, I had 2 failure. 9-10 years, I had 2 doctoral degree things that I started and I didn't finish. But it also led to other things in my life that at that point I didn't know that not doing these 2 doctoral degrees would have something related to that would occur later on in my life. And so this was not a failure exactly, but this was just something which I didn't plan the right way. And I was at that time, because I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I was also trying to get married because family pressure was always there. And societal pressure was also there. I wanted to be a mother. Biological clock was also ticking. So all these kept making me think less about my career, more about my wanting to get married. So I dated other people also again. That also didn't work out. So eventually, while all this, and combinedly all these things are going on, again I was again in a crisis phase in life, where what happened was, I didn't know what I should do. If my H1 visa gets over, should I stay in US? Again, I came to a time point of whether should I stay in US, should I leave US? If I leave US, where do I want to work? Should I really come back to India, where again I know my family doesn't really care what's happening to me. If I lived and died, they wouldn't know. I had major accidents in US. Sometimes I had health scares in US related to cancer. None of them knew about any of it. Or even if they knew about it, they knew about it 2-3 years after those incidents had already happened. So I never had this emotional support system in my life. I didn't have it emotionally from friends either. I didn't have it emotionally from family either. But majority of them, there were some rare friends, some rare family who would occasionally did care enough about me, but they were like breadcrumbs of care. So I've lived under this breadcrumbs of care paradigm for a long time, which is the reason why I started getting burnt out and fatigued. And the second reason I started getting burnt out and fatigued is all these worries. Imagine this: you don't know whether you're going to live in US. Your future is insecure. Whatever money you earned after the PharmD program didn't work out, I joined a MBA and a healthcare administration program. So there I had to pay for it. The first masters I did in US, I got a scholarship to study that. But in this master's, even though I did get partial scholarship, all that the scholarship helped me do was, instead of paying out of state tuition fees as a foreign student, now I was paying in state tuition fees. That's this kind of scholarship I got, and a little bit of uh, very minor tuition waiver I got. So majority of my MBA program studying I had to fund for myself. So all the savings that I had done by then from having worked steadily in the retail industry, all that money was now going into this coursework. But did I have any other choice? Not really. I had family who didn't care about how I'm doing financially. I had friends who didn't care how my friends or family both who didn't care how I'm doing emotionally. I dated boyfriends who also didn't care how am I doing financially or emotionally. So all in all, I was like again in a messy situation where I'm like, people don't really care what I'm going through. I don't have anyone who cares about how I'm going through things in life. But each of those challenges I was trying to cope up with in the best way I could cope up with at that time. For me, the best way I could cope up with was continuously continue to study and improve myself in the studies in a way that was aligned with me. So again, in the MBA program, in the MHA program, I gravitated towards taking the classes that aligns with me. I gravitated towards doing projects that aligns with my inner core nature. And after the MBA, if while doing the MBA, I also was looking for getting married. I found someone, I got married, and that was like the worst choice I ever made in my life. Really the worst choice, because that family didn't value educated women, didn't value independent women, didn't value that women can have their own dreams about careers. They didn't value many things about women, and plus they were the kind of toxicity that I've spoken in some of my other videos. I will not speak about it here, but I failed yet again. Where did I fail? I failed in a marriage. How did I fail? It was such a horrible marriage that within 6 months of the marriage broke apart. Actually, the marriage would have broken apart within a few months of the marriage. But because there's always social shame in India, and because people have this belief system that you shouldn't get divorced, you should at least give some time to the marriage to unfold. And I was feeling that pressure from everyone in the family. In the first few months of the marriage only, I realized that the compatibility was really off. Physically, mentally, sexually, everywhere. Socially. And not just the compatibility was off, that family was really crazy. Like if I tell you the tales that I was going through there, that was a nightmare tale. But because of whatever was happening related to that, and they had a green card through their family sponsorship, so they had sponsored my green card. Now I had this dual pressure that if I break this marriage, I will lose my green card. Second pressure was, if I break this marriage, socially I will now be ostracized by Indian society because divorcees aren't looked at that greatly. But despite these two pressures, because I had previously, again, I had two boyfriends before this marriage to this guy. I'd failed in those two relationships with those two guys, but those two failures were again a stepping stone to the failure in this marriage, where I was really in such a bad marriage where these guy and his family were so crazy. I was like, the past two not so bad experiences, like they were also toxic experiences, they were also partly incompatible experiences, but at least they were sane experiences, normal experiences of people when two incompatible people are trying to make life work with each other. But here, apart from incompatibility, something more toxic was going on. In fact, while in the marriage, I didn't even realize some of the really bad toxic stuff they were planning for me, which I realized another few years down the line. Because how you sometimes realize the silver lining from experience, some people can also realize the near miss of health harm that could have escalated in your life, that you didn't realize at that time or perceive at that time was harmful for you, but that extent of the harm of that thing came to my realization later on. So while, like with my ex-boyfriends, what happened was later on in life, when I was contemplating on things, reflecting on things, developing my self-awareness, meditating on things, writing and reflecting on my past life experiences, in when you have like a toxic relationship with someone, or when you have a conflict filled relationship with someone, at that time what all of us generally tend to do, we will usually just ascribe all the blame to the girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, right? So these two ex-boyfriends I had initially when I had broken off, obviously I also had that same mindset that these were the problem zones with them, and this is the reason why, like, it didn't work. But because I'm also a very balanced person, I also hold this I do not hold this perception that I'm a perfect person. So I also knew where I was going wrong in the relationships with them. But in this marriage, all the things that after breakups with the other exes that I had worked on to become a better person, where I knew where my flaws were, all the places where I was like doing the right thing or the best thing that was possible for me to do, I could see with this family, they would never be happy with whatever I did. And this, I also had that same experience with my parental family when I was growing up. So I knew that the nature of those people who will never be satisfied with whatever you do. How much ever you do your best or you are your best, you would never be enough for them. And this is why I was like, I don't care about the social shame. I don't care about that. I won't have a green card anymore. And I decided when something happened where, again, I was not the one who cut off this relationship. They cut off the relationship and they decided to file for divorce. And they thought that once they will file for divorce, I will come back and ask them and beg them that don't do the divorce. Because I had already done one time the same thing. Like my husband was going to walk out about, we were living in two different states. We were living in two different parts of US. And during the marriage, we hardly interacted 5-6 times, and in those 5-6 meetings only so many troubles escalated. In a few phone calls only so many troubles escalated. So some people can also be the kind who will mistake whatever you're saying and in taking it the wrong way. And you can't change people. Like if you say ABC and if they are only hearing DEF, which has got nothing to do with ABC, can you ever have any compatibility with such people? You can't, right? So when this was not working, when they asked for divorce, I wasn't the typical Indian girl who wanted to beg a guy that please stay with me or feel like a failure. So this is again where, even though I had failed time and time again in relationships, and this was like a major failure where everyone will have a view about or a mistaken perception about why I'm getting divorced, I didn't care. Why didn't I care? Because what should come and precede everything in life is health and self-respect, which is something many women or many people in marriages or in any life challenges don't usually have about themselves. Health, self-respect, and also self-awareness and self-care. In the first failure that I had focused more on health, emotional health. That's why having a job which was low paying didn't bother me. Having a job which I enjoyed doing helped me. Then again, when I was working as a pharmacist, I was really much more aligned to doing a job as a community pharmacist in US. I was very operationally very good. I like managing things in stressful situations as well sometimes. So the chaos of a pharmacy that happens, because our pharmacy wasn't like, I didn't have too many pharmacists. We had only one pharmacist. It was a small scale pharmacy in terms of business, and because of which I got to be the boss on the days I was working. Even though I didn't have the supervisor role, I had to do a lot of supervisory things. And even though my official title wasn't a supervisor, I was doing a lot of supervisory things, a lot of managerial things, which is what helped me in being a good MBA candidate and also very good in the MBA program that I did later on. I was also good in understanding US healthcare systems, which is also what helped me with my MHA program. So see, everything was building up to it was aligning with my personality and also building up to what I can do in life, what I'm good at doing in life. Only thing is, because of this marriage choice, I had to quit the US life because I had another choice at that time, that when the divorce was unfolding, I could sit and fight the divorce case with these people. They were giving me such a lot of stress, such a lot of mental stress, such a lot of psychological manipulations they were doing, and a lot of darkness was coming into my life as a result of this marriage. And I realized that I had to say no to that darkness. And because if I had stayed in US, what would have happened is they would have drained my energy with nuisance lawsuits, with nuisance things. And even when staying in the US, because now they had messed up my green card process, I would be in trouble even related to all the legal processes in US. And that's why I had this burnt out phase then, that not having good social support, not having good family support, not having good friend life, not having a surety of what I will do in US. Like, because if I had stayed to fight my court case with them regarding the divorce, and if for staying, whatever I would have to do next, I would have to again join another degree program. And by then I had 3 master's degrees, 2 half done doctoral degrees. So I had studied and studied and studied like 50% of my life in US. And so I got tired of studying at that point. Even though I knew I could join another program, and I'm very good in studies. It's not that I'm bad in studies. I'm really, really good in studies. I'm not the best student. I will never get a 4.0 GPA, but I'm above average in studies. Because I'm above average in studies, and even after failure, it doesn't faze me. I can succeed again in anything. That aspect has never changed in me. But I got just seriously exhausted studying. Even though I enjoyed my MBA program the most of all the programs I did in US, MBA and MHA was were the most delightful studying program for me. Even then, I just didn't have the strength in me to go and look for another degree program, to get enrolled in another program, to do further studies in US. And by then, because my social life was so distraught, I was like, I just want to go back to India. And if you have lived in a foreign country for many years, many of us go through this same challenge. We start missing many things about India that we are not getting in US. So I was missing Indian life as well. So I decided to come back to India and get back to my roots. And I decided this is the reason why this divorce is happening, or I chose this poor marriage. I wanted to take that break. And at that time, whatever salary and savings I had, much of my savings had gone away for the MBA program. So I didn't have much money. All I had was a couple of lakhs rupees, which I got only after I sold my car in US. After selling my car, whatever couple of lakhs of rupees I had, I was like, I can use these couple of lakhs in India and easily stay in India for a few average or lower middle class life. I can lead in India easily with that money. So I decided, let's go back to India, let's connect with my roots. I had some guilt about not being in touch with my brother and dad for so long, even though I know they were non-communicative and as close to me while I was living in US. I chalked it out to that they are not close to me because I live in a different country. So let's try connecting back to them. And then I had my Masi, I had my Nani, I had my other aunts and cousins whom I also wanted to reconnect with. So I decided, let's go back to India, let's see how it is living in India. Because the other thing was, I was so burnt out and fatigued, I wouldn't have been able to continue in US life studying for another degree program when I had already invested. I had like 3-4 years continuously had been doing the doctoral program, then 1 year of doctoral program, 3 years of MBA MHA program, and in the 3rd year of the MBA MHA program, the real burnout started happening, because the real burnout was first in that third year is when I got married. So I could have easily finished my MBA program in 2.5 years, but because I was so burnt out, so exhausted from being in a very crazy family, so some other things also happened that I didn't realize at that time was aiding my health harm. But and I was also not eating that well, because when you're depressed you don't eat that well, and whatever happened, I was very depressed, I was missing India, I was lonely, I didn't have all my friends who I had made in my initial years of US life. They'd all moved away from Utah. So I did manage to make a new group of friends, but they were all married with kids. So being a single woman with no kids, that was also a challenge. Again, that burnout phase happened when I was actually failing at multiple things. But this time I didn't feel like I was a failure. I didn't feel like I was a failure. So that's the difference between depression or having grief over a failure, or feeling bad about a failure, and the difference between depression that happens when you're completely tired of your life just simply dragging on and on with nothing you envisioned in your life actually manifesting in your life. Because I had never imagined that in my mid-30s I would not be married. I had never imagined in my mid-30s I would not have kids. I had never imagined in my mid-30s I had to again readdress what to do about my career. I had never imagined that my bank balance would be only a couple of lakhs in my mid-30s. None of this I had imagined when I went to US in my 20s. And when I went to US, the only thing in my previous video when I said my dad didn't invest anything, he had only invested, he had given me $500 to go to US. He had paid for my ticket to go to US. Apart from the $500 giving the ticket, and he had sponsored a few clothes for me that I bought for living in US. Other than these three things, he never spent any money on me after that. Or whatever money he has spent, it has been bare minimal. If you have fathers with the kind of income my father had, most fathers spend at least 10, 20, 30 times more than what my father spends. And he has been this kind of a dad even when I was a child, so I didn't regret that him never spending money on me. But that is the reality of my life. If I have a parent who doesn't spend anything on me, or when he spends, it's about some ulterior motives and other things, and my father is another crazy story. So whatever it is, when you know that you have to stand on your own 2 feet, making this choice of leaving US life completely isn't an easy choice. It took 3-4 months to contemplate that choice. But when you are burnt out and fatigued, again, health has to come before wealth. This is my principle in life, and my health was so bad mentally and emotionally. I knew that if I stayed in that country, these people would chew me, because they were very aggressive, very horrible family. And I went and also consulted. I looked at the laws myself, because I had some law related studies both for my pharmacy and my business. I had to read a lot of business law and pharmacy law. And even if you work in a hospital, you have to read a lot of laws related to hospital and research work. When the previous, whatever I did, every work in my life in US had some law related elements to it. So I understood legal jargon quite well. So first I went to, again, this being US and this being California where my husband was living, I went and checked the California laws, and I could see from the California laws that getting justice for my case would have been difficult. I could wait and go back to that marriage and get abused a little bit more to get some justice, but I am not the kind to sit and tolerate abuse. I don't tolerate abuse, or even if I have to tolerate it, I can tolerate it at a certain level. Beyond a certain level, I just decided I do not want to tolerate abuse. I do not want to tolerate psychological or emotional manipulation. I do not even want to tolerate financial manipulation, because they tried to financially also manipulate me. And I didn't have, like, if you have like your mother, father, family, sisters, brothers, someone emotionally supporting you to fight a case, you can still fight it. But when you don't have anyone to support you for any of these things, sometimes it's wiser to pick your battles. And that's why I picked this battle of not doing something where I knew I would completely, I'm already exhausted, but I would now get 10 times more exhausted by engaging in a stupid um, legal battle with them. And I already had analyzed this while looking at the law related free resources that were available to me. But after that, I also consulted two other lawyers. Again, they did a pro bono free consultation only, but despite that, what they gave me, their thoughts matched what I had analyzed. So they also said, if you want to leave and go, because because the marriage was only 6 months, then he hardly earned any money. Then okay, I might have got a couple of $1,000, which couple of $1,000 goes a long way. It will be a lakh or so of rupees in Indian terms. But even then, sometimes again, health should come before wealth. 1 lakh was not enough of a headache for me to sit and drain my energy with people who were seriously not at a communication level that will lead to any kind of good resolution to the ending of this marriage. So that's why I quit the US life. I came to India. I had multiple reasons again. It's not that I had only one reason, and I did, despite other people thinking that I'm failing in life at that point of time. Many people felt that I've failed in life. Many people felt sorry for me. But even though they felt sorry for me, the thing that I actually needed support from them didn't manifest. None of my, again, other set of failures started happening when I came back to India, and I will talk about those failures in my next video. But what can you learn in both these videos that I have created so far is this, that some people have come with the karma, some people have come with the life experience where they will have ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs about many things. But every time you have a up and down, how you get back up again determines the quality of life you will eventually have. In each of these ups and downs, now if I had got stuck, if I had failed a PhD and I got stuck, oh my god, I failed in PhD, what do I do, how do I get through this, blah blah blah. And if I had sat and wasted a couple of years of my life thinking, and I did waste, I'm not saying that I didn't do this, I did do this. It took me 1 year after 1.5 year after my PhD qualifiers, I finally joined work as a pharmacist. Almost nearly 2 years later, I joined as a pharmacist. Almost nearly 2 years later. So between 1.5 to 2 years later, I joined. And before joining also, I had 6 to 9 months of grief time where many emotional things were impacting my life. So I could have joined and become a pharmacist 6 months earlier. But I couldn't do it because I was grief stricken and other problems were going on with the boyfriend, with the personal life and everything. Right? So while 3-4 different troubles were happening at the same time, whatever is the best path forward, I always kept praying. So this is where I feel God has always been on my side in helping me when no humans were helping me. That whenever I prayed that whatever is the best solution, let that come forward. That is what happened. If especially with my all 3 boyfriends, I'll tell you, every time I had a distressing life with a boyfriend where they were emotionally abusive, physically abusive, financially abusive, whatever they were doing, emotionally toxic or emotionally unsupportive, whatever they were doing that makes them really bad life partners for me, and me a bad life partner for them also sometimes. Whatever was going on in those relationships, when I could see that these relationships are not going the way ideally a relationship should go forward, I had always prayed that if this relationship has to end, let it end. I do not want to go further in this relationship. Show me a way out. And it's not that I pray today and immediately it starts happening. No. But as soon as I have prayed this and I have done it a repeated few times, what happens next is, it happened next in any of these relationships which were meant to break, which were only meant to be a life lesson for me. I failed those relationships, but I failed in a way that was aligned for me to fail. Because if I had continued in these relationships right now, even though I am a 40-year-old, many people who look at my picture don't think that I look 40, right? Why? I have been able to maintain this easiness of spirit, and even though I have gone through all these grief, many people don't even realize looking at me that I have all these grief from my past, right? But how have I managed to do that? I managed to do that because every time grief was happening, I knew how to overcome that grief slowly, step by step. It's not easy to go through that grief slowly, step by step, especially if you're doing it on your own, but it is possible to do it. And if you do it, you get to the next silver lining, because I really had 6-7 years of good silver lining experience related to my work life, good silver lining experience related to what I learned in US, and the same things that I learned in US has helped save me right now in India when I was going through cancer. 2 of my degree programs, the pharmacology program where I didn't finish the PhD, the doctor of pharmacy program where I didn't finish the doctorate degree, both these programs, education and my work experience related education, all of these combined helped keep me alive when in India I didn't have enough money to spend on my healthcare, or if I had gone and spent the money I have in my bank for my healthcare, I knew I would not get the right healthcare help because there was a lot of misdiagnosis and other things going on, and which is what I would speak about in my next video. But this is the silver lining. Like, if you keep helping yourself, if you keep getting up from some challenge in life, or if you even divert your life completely from what you envisioned your life would be in the past, sometimes what's coming up next, even if you don't know what's coming up next, it may be something really worthwhile that comes up next. And if it is not worthwhile at that point of time, if you never felt that, oh, this was a fabulous experience while you were going through an experience, few years down the line, remember that anything that you did in alignment with your soul and in alignment with your life path with God, if you have done those kind of things in your life, always a good silver lining pops up. Anyways, silver linings always pop up, but some really good silver linings pop up in our life as a consequence of having done the right things in life also. And every time you do a right thing, there's a universal blessing that's waiting for you to manifest later on in life, which you don't realize when you are going through that challenge. You don't realize when you're suffering. You don't realize when you're crying. But in your crying, in your suffering, your soul speaks to you. And that soul speaking then tells you what you should do next. And that telling then leads you, if you are aligned with yourself, if you're doing the right things in life, it will invariably lead you to some good karma. And this is where the Indian principle of when Krishna tells Arjun that fal ki chinta mat kar, this is what it is about. If you are always, failures are what? Failures are when we feel we have done this XYZ good thing, and its immediate fruits of that good thing should happen to us immediately. But life is not like that. Even if you did XYZ good thing in your 20s, it's not necessary that the goodness that you showed in your 20s, its fruits of those goodness will show up in your life in your 20s itself, or 1 month down the line, or 1 day down the line. No. That's why you should never ever think about the fruits of your labor. So if you don't concentrate on the fruits of your labor, if you don't concentrate too much on the failures that you have, like you take it as a part of your life's journey, then in those failures also, whatever shifted your life after the failure is where lies the stepping stones to the fruits of your labor also. Sometimes it is also actually a fruit of your labor, but in a different way. So a way that is more aligned with you, and which is what many failures are supposed to be in your life. Many failures and challenges are meant to show you which fruits of your labor should you focus on, or what is aligned with your soul that will really bring you the beautiful life that you envision. I can't have a beautiful life if I want a marriage with kids and a happy life and a good love life. Could I have ever had a good love life with a husband who doesn't respect me, a husband who's financially abusing me, a husband who thinks I am abusive towards them, or someone with whom the incompatibility is so much that we are both abusing each other? You can never have that compatible marriage with any of these people, right? So if you failed in those relationships, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Most people think it's a bad thing, but when in reality it is a bad thing if you had continued on a toxic relationship and incurred really bad karma with those people for many years. Whereas it's actually a good thing if you leave a toxic zone with someone, a toxic zone where you couldn't merge lives, you couldn't become compatible with them, you couldn't align a life with them. Because if you are not able to align, if you're not able to keep each other happy, if you're not able to be each other's good loving life partners, you are better off living on your own. And despite all my sufferings, even now in life, I do not regret any of the failures of my past. The only thing I regretted at that moment what I was feeling. I regretted the grief. I did go through grief. I did go through all the emotions that failures bring inside you. But I didn't hold on to all the negative emotions that failure brings inside you. And if you focus on the positive of what the failure is trying to teach you, or the lesson that you were meant to learn from that failure, it stops influencing your present and your future then. And when it stops influencing your present and your future, you don't get stuck in the mire of your failures. I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, please drop me a comment. Thank you very much.